Welcome to the podcast overview of the SRMBOK Newsletter of 19 August 2026. For those of you who aren't familiar with SRMBOK, it stands for the Security Risk Management Body of Knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So today we're going to explain why an attacker, sitting in a basement on the other side of the world, might actually care more about a physical security guard standing at a Boeing airport ramp at 3 a.m. than they do about a company's, million-dollar firewall.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how completely flipped our current threat landscape is right now.
Right. So think of today's deep dive as a sort of director's cut. This week's dispatch from the newsletter is just absolutely massive.
Oh, it is. It's huge.
Yeah, so much raw data. So we're going to act as your directors today, basically pulling back the curtain to reveal the hidden narrative that connects global geopolitics, incredibly specific cyber vulnerabilities, and most importantly, the practical tools you need to build a security business case.
A business case that actually gets funded by your board. And, well, because time is the one resource none of us can patch or upgrade, let's start with the 60-second executive summary of the core theme we are dealing with today.
Let's do it.
So, the physical world is reorganizing itself through conflict and these new multipolar alliances. This geopolitical chaos is it's bleeding directly into cyberspace.
Right.
And that significantly lowers the barrier to entry for attacks on critical infrastructure. All of this is happening while AI is actively accelerating high-end threats.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
It is. So the mandate for security leaders today is leveraging this reality to build airtight business cases for fundamental resilience and, crucially, identity management.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a lot to take in.
It's a lot, yeah.
To really understand the cyber vulnerabilities we're facing right now, we have to start by looking at the physical world that is generating these threats. The old rules of global deterrence, they seem to be entirely gone.
They are.
And I want to be incredibly clear right up front for our listeners, we are maintaining strict neutrality today. We're simply exploring the risk management analysis provided in the source text, not taking any political sides whatsoever.
Absolutely. We're just looking at the risk models.
Right. So looking at the macro threat environment, we have to talk about Professor Jiang's 2024 predictions from the piece, The Shape of War.
Yeah. That is a highly sobering analysis to read in hindsight.
Definitely.
Jiang predicted that a U.S. ground war in Iran would follow a very historical pattern of asymmetry. The core concept is that a technologically superior military gets bogged down and essentially neutralized by a highly motivated, geographically fortified society.
Right, and we're seeing that.
We are. What we're seeing play out in the analysis is how this kind of localized conflict accelerates a much broader shift. We are moving rapidly away from a unipolar world, dominated by one superpower.
Toward a deeply multipolar world order.
Exactly.
Wait, let me stop you there. When you say multipolar world order, you mean multiple different power centers are emerging simultaneously, right? Because we are seeing massive global realignments happening at lightning speed.
Precisely. The power dynamics are just fracturing. Look at the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement that was mentioned in the briefing.
The new Middle Eastern NATO. That involves Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan, right?
Yes. They're combining nuclear, conventional, and technological capabilities to prep for what is essentially a regional Cold War.
Wow.
And simultaneously, you have North Korea throwing 50,000 troops into Russia.
Which is wild.
It is. In risk management terms, that effectively creates a state-level model for outsourcing casualties. The newsletter actually makes a really chilling historical point here.
How about the World War II label?
Yeah. The label World War II wasn't formally codified by the U.S. government until 1945, years after it had actually started.
That is terrifying. It implies we might be in the middle of a massive global shift, and we literally won't know what to call this era until we're looking in the rearview mirror. And this instability, it's popping up everywhere. In Afghanistan, the Afghan United Front, or AUF, has emerged. But they aren't necessarily trying to conquer the country outright, are they?
No, their strategy is quite different.
Yeah.
They are stretching the Taliban's fragile governance through highly coordinated attacks.
On repression networks, right?
Right. They are explicitly targeting the system's capacity to govern rather than just grabbing territory.
And then look at the situation in Africa. It's just incredibly volatile. You have U.S. kinetic strikes against ISIS targets, like the operation that killed Abu Bilal Mamanouki. But Those strikes are colliding directly in the exact same geopolitical theater with Chinese critical mineral dominance and, struggling Russian security efforts.
This is crowded space.
It feels like playing a game of chess where half the pieces suddenly decide to change how they move. But surely, if all these major global powers are distracted by these overlapping conflicts, isn't that creating a vacuum?
It creates a vacuum, yes, but more importantly for the listener, it creates a highly complex system of dependencies.
Okay, how so?
The risk management lesson here is that terrorism, migration, maritime choke points, and great power rivalries are no longer isolated events happening over there.
Right.
They are interacting components of the same geopolitical system. And crucially, they are interacting components of your corporate supply chain.
Which perfectly explains the China case study in the newsletter. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, almost every conventional model predicted a catastrophic global economic shock.
Right. Everyone saw it coming.
But China actually survived it. How did they do that?
Through incredibly opaque strategic reserves, they made a massive pivot to domestic coal, and they really leveraged their electric vehicle infrastructure.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they'd spent years building physical resilience quietly. It proves that the most effective control on a complex system might be one that conventional scenario modeling completely overlooks.
Yeah.
They didn't rely on a military solution to a maritime choke point. They engineered a domestic buffer.
And when traditional deterrence falls apart like we're seeing in these regions, states get desperate. They start looking for non-traditional ways to project power.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why this multipolar chaos is bleeding into domestic physical infrastructure. And it's prompting some radical state responses. For instance, the U.S. is mobilizing vetted private security firms for cyber effects operations against foreign hacker gangs.
Backed by a $1 million bond.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds exactly like a cyber Blackwater. What happens the first time a private contractor gets it wrong in someone else's jurisdiction?
That is the $1 million question, quite literally with that bond.
Yeah.
Privateering with a compliance function is still privateering.
Right.
But the reason states are taking these drastic, almost desperate measures is because the bleed from geopolitics into physical domestic infrastructure is so severe right now. Threat actors aren't just stealing data anymore.
They are turning off the lights and the water.
Okay.
Which brings us to that CISA alert regarding the 30 Minnesota water systems that were hit. The attackers forced towns into boil water notices, but the newsletter said they were changing PLCs. What exactly is a PLC, and how does a hacker change it from across the globe?
So a PLC is a programmable logic controller. Think of it as the physical electronic brain of an industrial machine.
Okay.
In this case, the water pumps and chemical mixers. Attackers were logging into these brains remotely, changing the operational parameters, locking out the human operators in the facility, and, altering the water treatment process.
That is so dangerous.
It is, and here's the kicker. They didn't use some advanced nation-state zero-day exploit to do this.
Oh, don't tell me.
Default passwords.
Wow.
They used default passwords on industrial gear that someone had mistakenly left exposed to the open internet.
Unbelievable.
This is exactly why the Water ISEC advisory on protecting PLCs, which is linked in this week's newsletter, is mandatory reading if you operate operational technology.
It is wild that in 2026 we are still talking about default passwords on critical water infrastructure, but it proves your earlier point, physical access and basic oversights defeat advanced cyber models.
100%.
Which brings me back to the hook I mentioned at the very beginning, the Boeing 737 hack. A group of academics managed to manipulate aircraft data buses. How did they actually do that?
Well, they bypassed the aircraft's internal cybersecurity entirely.
Okay, how?
They took a coin-sized device and physically plugged it into an external port on the outside of the airplane.
Wait, on the outside?
Yeah. Because they had physical access to the port, they could feed manipulated data directly into the plane's internal communication network.
So all the encryption in the world doesn't matter if someone can just walk up to the plane on the tarmac and plug in a device.
Exactly.
The most important security control for that aircraft isn't cryptographic at all. It's asking the security guard who has physical ramp access at 3 a.m.
That's it. We are seeing this convergence of cyber and physical risk everywhere, and it completely breaks traditional risk registers. Take the research from Clarity's Team 82.
Right.
They found 23 vulnerabilities in Copeland commercial refrigeration controllers.
I read that proof of concept and it was terrifying. Can you explain the mechanism behind that attack? Like, how do you hack a refrigerator?
So the attackers target the controller that manages the cooling system. They raise the physical temperature in the cold storage unit so the food begins to spoil. But, and this is the really malicious part, they manipulate the sensor data being sent back to the monitoring dashboard.
Oh, wow.
So the human operator looking at the screen sees that the temperature is perfectly normal, the food spoils invisibly.
So by the time someone physically walks into the freezer, the entire inventory is ruined.
Yep. What's fascinating here is that the consequence of that cyber attack sits entirely in the food safety risk register.
Right, not the IT one.
Exactly. The person who owns that operational risk, the warehouse manager or the food safety compliance officer, has probably never even met the chief information security officer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The disconnect between the cyber cause and the physical consequence is profound.
And we see the economic logic of this playing out with industrial ransomware, which the newsletter notes is up 12% in Q2 alone.
It's surging.
You have groups like the Gunra ransomware crew chewing through critical infrastructure right now. And again, they aren't using magic. They are using Fortinet software bugs that have been patched by the vendor for over a year. Why is manufacturing getting hit so hard by this?
Because for a manufacturing plant, downtime is simply more expensive than paying the ransom.
They just want to get back online.
Right. The attackers know the economic pain point. And while critical infrastructure is struggling to apply basic patches that are a year old, the broader digital threat landscape is being absolutely supercharged by AI.
And a fundamental shift in attacker behavior.
Exactly.
The speed is what blew my mind. The CrowdStrike 2026 Threat Hunting Report states that 88% of vulnerabilities are being exploited within 48 hours of disclosure.
It's incredibly fast.
And if we look at China-linked groups, they are moving inside of 24 hours.
Let's put that in perspective. If your organization's patch service level agreement for internet-facing systems is measured in weeks or, even days, you aren't managing risk anymore.
You're just documenting it.
You're just documenting it for the post-breach audit.
And AI is acting as both the weapon and the target here. I was looking at the Trend Micro H1 2026 APT report. APT meaning Advanced Persistent Threat, which usually refers to sophisticated, often nation-state hacking groups.
Right.
The report shows how these attackers are weaponizing our own trust. They aren't building bespoke, shady-looking infrastructure anymore. They are hiding inside the services you already trust and use every day, like Microsoft 365 or DevTunnel.
Yes, the EarthCRAN group is a prime example of this. They essentially turned publicly available exploits into massive automated scanners using generative AI.
Wait, I need you to explain this to me. The newsletter mentioned that because they are hiding in trusted services, allow listing trusted domains is now a control that actively helps the adversary. How does that work? If I tell my firewall to only trust traffic from Microsoft, how does that help the hacker?
Well, because the hacker is also using Microsoft.
Yo.
In the past, attackers hosted their malware on weird, suspicious domains, right? So you could just block them. Now, the attacker rents space on Microsoft Azure or uses Microsoft 365 to send their commands.
I see.
If your firewall is configured to implicitly trust all traffic coming from Microsoft, the attacker's traffic flows right through your defenses without being inspected. You've essentially given the fox a VIP pass to the henhouse because he's wearing a trusted uniform.
That is incredibly frustrating, and it perfectly sets up this massive shift we are seeing in both the Cloudflare and Unit 42 reports. The whole paradigm has changed. Adversaries have shifted from trying to break in to simply logging in.
Logging in. Yes.
We saw this clearly with Connor Riley Muka, the Snowflake hacker who just pleaded guilty. He didn't break Snowflake's complex encryption, did he?
Not at all. He ransacked 165 different customer tenants using stolen credentials.
Wow.
He just typed in a username and a password that he bought on the dark web or scraped from malware. He was able to do this because none of those victim organizations had multi-factor authentication turned on.
Which is free.
MFA would have stopped it, and it's largely a free control.
And it gets even more careless. Look at the Beacon's CRM breach. An AWS access key, the literal digital key to their cloud server, was just sitting in publicly available JavaScript code on their website.
Spelling it.
It exposed data from over 1,000 charities. Anyone who knew how to right-click and view the code on the web page could take the key.
This is exactly what we mean by the logging in era. You don't need to be a sophisticated hacker if the administrator leaves the keys in the door.
Yeah.
And this vulnerability is being heavily compounded by how organizations are rushing to adopt AI.
Oh, the AI agents.
Yes. The State of AI Agent Security report in the newsletter is a glaring red flag. 81% in development teams have autonomous AI agents in testing or production right now.
Okay.
But 45.6% of them are using shared API keys to give those agents access to databases.
Okay, I have to stop you there because this is maddening. We have spent the last 20 years teaching human employees not to share passwords on sticky notes.
Yep.
And now we are handing shared API keys to autonomous AI software. That feels like building a hyper-advanced fortress with retinal scanners, but leaving the master key under the welcome mat.
And to build on your analogy, the welcome mat is sitting in a crowded public square.
Seriously.
If an attacker finds that shared API key, they don't just get limited access to one minor system. Because it's a shared key used by an autonomous AI agent that needs broad permissions to do its job, the attacker gets the keys to the entire autonomous brain.
And every system it touches.
Exactly. This is why the newsletter explicitly recommends grabbing the OWASP agent memory guard to stop memory poisoning in these AI models, and DocSec for container scanning that developers can actually read and use.
No.
We are scaling our vulnerabilities much faster than our controls.
The sheer volume and variety of recent incidents is staggering. You have the Siva Logistics third-party outage that disrupted major brands not because they were hacked, but simply because they all shared a physical distribution spine that went down.
Right. A single point of failure.
This highlights why that Black Duck 2026 open source security risk analysis report and the Google Cloud post-quantum roadmap mentioned in the resources are so critical. You have to understand your deferred liabilities and supply chain dependencies.
Yeah, absolutely do.
And speaking of liabilities, Microsoft just dropped a patch update for 421 different vulnerabilities, CVEs, in a single Tuesday.
That is just a massive number.
That included the Shieldbreak 0-day. For the listener, a 0-day is a flaw the software maker didn't even know existed, meaning they had 0 days to prepare a fix before it was exploited. But 421 patches at once. A patch cycle that size is a capacity planning nightmare, not a routine maintenance task.
Precisely. If your IT team is spending all week just trying to test and deploy 421 patches without breaking your own systems, they aren't doing proactive security.
Yeah, they're just bailing water.
Right. Then there's the Ring Central incident, where 1.6 million people had their data published. It wasn't passwords, just names and phone numbers, but that is the exact raw material needed for highly targeted phishing attacks.
Phishing, meaning voice phishing, right? Where they call the employee pretending to be the IT help desk.
Correct. Armed with your real name, phone number, and internal corporate details, those phone calls become incredibly convincing.
I can imagine.
Or look at the stealthy attacks targeting unauthenticated guest access on Salesforce and ServiceNow.
How does that actually work? The newsletter said attackers pull data without ever touching a credential.
Well, these platforms have portals designed to serve data to logged-in users. But if a portal was misconfigured years ago to allow unauthenticated guest access, meaning anyone on the internet can view it, attackers just use automated tools to scan the web for these forgotten portals.
Oh, wow.
They don't need a password. They just send a web request to the portal's API asking for the data. And the portal happily hands over the database because it was told years ago the guests are allowed to see it.
That is terrifyingly simple, and we can't forget the insider threats. Origin Energy just traced a massive data breach back to a former Accenture employee in Manila.
Yep.
And even worse, an unnamed U.S. federal agency actually hired a North Korean IT worker. How does a federal agency accidentally hire a nation-state threat actor?
Because our remote hiring pipelines are built entirely for speed and cost reduction, not for security or rigorous identity verification.
Wow. We did see some justice recently with Maxim Silmakow, the mastermind behind the Belarusian ransom cartel, finally getting a 16-year sentence.
That was good news.
But as the newsletter astutely points out, deterrence that takes a decade to arrive isn't exactly a great control to put on your risk register.
It really isn't. Which leads us to the most critical part of this deep dive. We've laid out a very daunting, complex threat landscape today.
Very daunting.
The question every security leader listening right now is asking is, how do I translate this chaotic reality into a business case that the board will actually fund? How do we get the budget to fix this?
Exactly.
You start by leveraging the exact data we just discussed. If you need budget for a robust identity management program, you don't talk about the technical mechanics of APIs.
Right, they don't care about that.
No. You take the Cloudflare report detailing the industry-wide shift to logging in, and you pair it with the Unit 42 finding that identity gaps feature in nearly 90% of all incident response investigations.
That is a solid argument.
Those aren't just technical metrics. Those are boardroom justifications. You are showing them that the nature of the war has changed.
And the SRMBOK newsletter is packed with free tools to help structure this argument. I absolutely love the bow tie field kit they released this week.
It's fantastic.
It teaches you how to build a risk bow tie model with a room full of non-technical stakeholders. It emphasizes that you must start at the knot, the top event, not the left side of the diagram.
Right.
It also lists the 12 most common mistakes that ruin these models. And the ultimate test it provides is brilliant. If nobody in the room can say where a control is actually written down, and nobody would notice if that control stopped working tomorrow, it's a hope, not a control.
That is a foundational risk principle. A hope will not survive an audit or a breach.
Definitely not.
And if you are trying to build that business case, you should also be wiring the CISA-known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, the KEV, directly into your prioritization process.
Right. The KEV catalog is basically a hit list of vulnerabilities that attackers are actively using in the wild, correct?
Exactly. Using the KEV stops those endless internal arguments over CDSS scores, the theoretical severity of a bug.
Yeah, the debates over a 7 versus an 8.
Right. It doesn't matter if the theoretical score is a 5 or a 10. If it's on the KEV, it means bad actors are actively using it right now. Fix it.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, if you are building a case for operational technology, download the free NIST SP 882 Revision 3 guide.
A great resource.
And for the board, grab the NIST CSF 2.0 Enterprise Risk Management Guide. It is perfect for handing to a finance colleague who mistakenly thinks cyber risk only lives in the IT department.
The newsletter also mentions that Julian has made his book, Tactical Risk Management, completely free on Kindle this week. It is a fantastic, highly practical pocket guide.
It really is.
And there are still a few more crucial resources we need to mention. If you are relying on ISO 31000 for your frameworks, you need to track the Edition 3 draft that's in development right now. Also, for software supply chains, CISA's open source software security principles is essential reading. And if you have built your own risk templates or tools, the newsletter is running a call for templates where you can publish your work to the community and keep an 80% revenue share.
It's an excellent community initiative.
It really is.
And if you are looking to network, upskill, or figure out how your peers are handling this multipolar chaos, the upcoming events calendar is just packed.
Oh, there's so much going on.
We have ASIAL in Sydney, GSX in Atlanta, SANS Sydney 44Con, and the Gartner Summit in London.
SANS Network Security in Vegas, too.
Yes, the International Security Expo, the NMFTA Cybersecurity Conference specifically for the freight industry, and the ISC2 Security Congress.
You really have no excuse not to get out there.
Not to mention, if you are looking to make a move, the job market listings in the newsletter are incredibly robust globally right now, spanning everything from federal CISO roles down to humanitarian security managers in conflict zones.
I also highly recommend picking up the foundational book mentioned this week, Normal Accidents by Charles Perrow.
Oh, a classic.
It explains exactly why tightly coupled, highly complex systems fail in ways nobody can predict. Which, honestly, sounds like my entire week in a nutshell.
I think we can all relate to that.
Speaking of coping mechanisms for this industry, I have to share the joke from the end of the newsletter. Why do security risk managers prefer dark mode? Because vulnerabilities hide better in the shadows, or it just hides the tears during the quarterly board update.
It's funny because it hurts.
It really does.
It is entirely too accurate. But to bring this all back together, I want to leave our listeners with a provocative thought that connects the macro geopolitics we started with back to the individual risk manager listening right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
We saw earlier that China's resilience to the Strait of Hormuz closure came from opaque strategic reserves, a physical buffer, a control that conventional models barely even consider.
Right.
It raises an important question. What is the corporate equivalent of that strategic reserve? In our relentless pursuit of efficiency, just-in-time supply chains, and perfectly lean operations, have we engineered out our own capacity to absorb a systemic shock?
That is a great point.
Are our organizations too tightly coupled to survive the next unexpected geopolitical or cyber event?
That is exactly what we need to be asking ourselves and our boards this week. This has been a summary of edition 61 of the SRMBOK newsletter. You can subscribe for future editions or read the full newsletter at www.srmbk.com.